Yes,
So
this is
this
what.
is probably the most asked question, I think, but you can call it either, right? Because PUMA started off in Germany, so the German pronunciation is PUMA. But when we reached the US markets, we realized, well, they pronounce it as Puma. So you can call it either, either's fine.
So
Puma.
you
Chalega, let's settle for
Chalega.
Puma.
you can.
It's eventually the animal.
Let's settle for Puma. Done?
Done.
All the best.
Done.
Perfect. Thank you, Aditya, and thank you, Shreya and Ayaz, for joining me here. So we have a very interesting panel. The topic is the winning formula. Is there a playbook to effective marketing? And 2022. But I want to just go back 2.5 years when the COVID-19 was in the thick of in the thick of its times. What happened is we saw a certain trend shaping up as far as marketing is concerned, and then we continued that to some extent. A lot of things from there are still relevant in 2022, and a lot of things maybe we can do away with. So first, give me a sense of, from these 2.5 years, almost three. How much has marketing retained what we learned during those times, and how much needs to be undone?
Should I go first? All right. So I think, of course, this is something that probably we would have seen across categories. But speaking about Puma, right, I think a couple of things that we saw in terms of drastic shifts that I think have almost become part and parcel now for us, right? As a brand. And I think one, which is probably the most important, is we saw a huge shift from consumption offline to consumption online, right? And almost completely flipped in terms of channel contribution. Now, one would assume post-pandemic, people are stepping out again. Probably the dependence on online channels goes down, right? But I think the affinity that we built with online channels in the pandemic has stayed, right? The convenience of shopping online, the width of options that you have, supply chains are scaling up. So with 24 to 48-hour delivery, extremely easy returns, everything at your fingertips. I think online consumption is definitely here to stay, right? So as a channel for a lot of brands, I'm sure that stays very much still relevant and a key channel for them. So I don't think that changes. I think, of course, the second very important one is social media, right? That started off in the pandemic as probably the only source of entertainment or information. Thank you. Hello? Yes. Yeah. So I think, social media is something which, probably again blew up during the pandemic majorly because it was the only form of any communication that people had. But even now that people are stepping out, I think for any brand, social media still remains extremely critical. Influencers that we saw sort of coming up in the pandemic, right? Because there was a shift in terms of the kind of content being consumed on social media and the people who sort of came to the forefront, right? And I think that still remains extremely critical. We've seen a huge shift in terms of the role that influencers play for brands. I think, especially for the younger generation, right? We're seeing that in terms of, celebrity status or taste makers or, literally the concept of influence. I think traditional celebrities are probably taking a back seat. And content creators and influencers that sort of came to the fore through social media are actually the ones that are gaining prominence, especially with the younger generation, right? So I think this stays very much still part of the mix. This is still, extremely important. But I think the one thing that, and I'm sure you can back me up as brands, that we really missed from a consumer touch point is the offline interaction, right? So whether it's events, whether it's doing things in stores, store interactions, just going out there and engaging with your consumers face to face. I think that is something that has come back full force. And even from resources and spends perspective, I think as a brand, we are spending a lot of time and effort on engaging with the consumer face to face, right? And to give you guys a perspective, I think the offline touchpoint is so important that for us, about 80% of our consumers who come to our stores are repeat consumers, right? Because you build that face-to-face relationship, you build that face-to-face interaction, you actually convert a consumer for life. So for us, the offline channel has come back full force. Events where you engage with your consumers offline, I think that's something that we've really, focused on now. And it's something that is definitely going to stay even as we go ahead.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Shreya. Well, on the last point, Shreya, like you were saying, that I will completely agree to the fact that although it's a very different category, life insurance, yes, but the entire face-to-face interaction, the brand going out and talking to consumers and customers physically, I think there's nothing that can take away that experience. A digital experience would never be able to give that to an end customer or a consumer, whether it's life insurance or it's Puma or any other brand for that matter. Coming back to your primary question, I think what the pandemic did, there are three things for me, right? What the pandemic really did was humans by nature are extremely adaptable as species, right? So we had to adapt or we would have perished. So there was no other reason for us to not look at content, whether it's social media, whether it's OTT, whether it's everything digital. There was no option. But as social animals, if given an option, humans would venture out, interact, have conversations, etc. So then the three things that came to me was, one was the rise of influencers, no second thoughts about it, that increasingly brands took on to influencers engaging with customers and consumers and telling them about the brand and the experience in a way that was never seen before. That's number one. Number two that happened was a rise of mobile content. There was everything and anything getting adapted to mobile in vernacular and through video. So vernacular and video, the importance of these two things only tripled or maybe went up 4x because of that effect, and that we see even now, the importance of vernacular and video. Number three, I believe that especially for life insurance as a category, the D2C business boomed. No second thoughts about it. But what really happened, the digital literacy at the end of the consumer and that of the brand went up 4x. More digital literate customers and consumers, it makes life a lot more easier now to service them and to drive customer experience than what it was earlier. So I think these three things largely summed up the experience from a life insurance perspective, but goes without saying, whether it's Max Life Insurance or Puma or any other brand, for that matter, Mastercard, I think when you go out and drive experiential conversations with customers and consumers, there's nothing taking away from that experience ever.
So while experiential has, we touched upon both of you on that bit, and of course, in a way, of course, Puma plus your brand, experiential is a larger piece somewhere, And give me a sense of, we talk about digital taking the center stage of all the marketing conversations, traditional building that impact. How important is experiential, for your brand, and what kind of an experience, what kind of experiences do you curate to ensure that you were saying 80% of consumers are repeat? What innovation or what change is happening on the experiential front as far as your brand is concerned?
Sure. So look, I think the first thing to think about is that brands always face, right? Of course, in a completely digital space, you maximize reach, right? Because you're reaching a huge amount of audience at the same time. It's not localized, right? But where experiential really has an edge when you interact with consumers face to face is somewhere your CLV gets impacted, right? So you're basically building a consumer who has engaged with the brand so deeply that somewhere you have built that bond, right? And if I just look at the consumer funnel, right? I think in terms of top of the funnel, you definitely need reach, right? And I think to a large extent, social media and digital solves for that in a great way, right? But I think the stickiness and pushing the consumer through the funnel only comes with a much deeper form of engagement, right? So the likelihood of that consumer coming back to you again and again is only when you have engaged with them in a really deep manner, right? Otherwise, you're just another content piece on their feed that they've swiped up and forgotten about in 30 seconds, right? So I think for brands, it's very important to balance the two. Yes, you need reach to scale, but it's pointless unless you're converting a consumer that comes back again and again, because essentially then for each new consumer, you have to spend a significant amount, right? Versus if you've already converted a consumer, it's like basically the consumer's coming back to you without that much push from your side. It's push and pull, right? So I think for brands, first of all, it's really, and for marketers, it's really important to understand both, that you need reach, but CLV is super critical as well. And you need to check how you're pushing the consumer down the funnel, right? Now, why I said 80% of my audience comes back, to my stores is because of that touch point, right? So whether it's helping them find the right kind of product that they need, WhatsApping them new launches so that consumers can get a hand on them first, right? Or even curating experiences in and around the store, right? So for our, say, key customers, every time we're launching a new store and we invite, say, a brand ambassador. So we just launched the Linking store in Mumbai, right? And we had Kareena Kapoor and a couple of influencers come in. For our key customers, we call them to be a part of the experience, right? Because we want to give them a little something extra for being loyal. Or, like I was chatting up with you guys, before this, that we recently in Bangalore, we conducted a hyperlocal run that started and ended at our store in Brigade Road. And more than 2,000 people turned up, right? Because people are looking for those touch points. They're looking for how you add value to them, right? So I think from engaging with them deeply, I think this format is absolutely irreplaceable. And obviously, it's not immediately scalable. You have to do it in smaller pockets. That's how the deeper engagement comes. But it pays off in terms of long-term benefits to the brand.
Yeah. So for us, like I had mentioned, I think going forward and even looking at the way marketeers overall are spending their dollars and spending their money is that the right way is the hybrid way. There's no way that you can say that offline is more important than online or online is more important than offline. That debate needs to end. I know that debate is an interesting one and a whole lot of conversations happens around that, but it has to be a balancing act. There's no question that one can stay without the other because, as I said, habit formation. Humans develop habits, extremely difficult for them to get rid of that. Digital is a habit, very difficult for anyone to get rid of that. Coming to the fact that how life insurance kind of evolved, right? So we have just give you an example, and I think examples work a lot better, at least in my case. So we have a property called Super Customer Week, right? It's one of the most awarded properties that we have. And what it does is that current customers of Max Life Insurance who are policy holders, close to 40 lakh of them, we celebrate the customer once a month through digital and physical interventions. Through digital, we engage with them through quizzes, through, let's say, artificial or augmented reality experiences. We engage with them through video marketing. Earlier, it used to be webinars. Now it's become a little more different because webinars are losing sheen. And then on ground, there is always an experiential, as we call the typical consumer activation happening in those cities for those customers to come and engage with the brand right there and then. So I think in both ways, the best of both worlds is offered to the end consumer. That's number one. Number two, I think powerful storytelling, your stories that you go out to the consumer with really matter a lot. I think whether it's digital, whether it's offline, online, what's the brand trying to tell? What's the brand trying to solve? I think those stories are very important. And typically the way we do in our storytelling is that we stay very, very true to our insights and we try and drive that story through that one powerful central creative idea and then drive that idea across all touch points. So the consistency of messaging that a consumer gets to know, right from buying a life insurance policy to receiving a physical policy pack is the same. So the messaging stays consistent, the story stays appealing, and we drive it through an extremely hybrid model. So I think that these three things are very important for us as a category as well.
So I just want to go back to the 2022 now, since it's 2 months to 2023. If I have to ask you, Shreya, your biggest learnings in this year, what would that be?
I think, maybe first speaking from a category standpoint, right? We saw a huge uptick in terms of fitness in the pandemic. People took to it in a big way. That has stayed and continued, right? So even as we move towards the festive season, I think for us, talking about fitness, encouraging fitness, is a no-brainer, right? And we've reaped rewards with that. In fact, we have the Delhi Half Marathon this weekend, right? And we're expecting huge numbers to turn out. So, for us, I think the most important takeaway from the pandemic as a category, and something that we see will just continue to rise, is this focus on fitness, right? And not just for us as a brand. I mean, whether it's like wearable technology or apps, I think this space is something that is definitely a focus area for us. And this is a space that we'd want to leverage a lot more, because we're, of course, both a fitness and a lifestyle brand. But the kind of spikes that we've seen, for example, even on our platforms for running shoes, right, that started in the pandemic and continues to sort of develop even now. So I think from a 2022 and onwards strategy as well, the focus on fitness, especially how you convert it through, again, experiential events that you hold for your consumers, the way you add value to their fitness routine, whether it's by educating them or giving them opportunities to actually participate in fitness events, participate in sports, I think is definitely going to be, a critical factor for us. And of course, the best time to talk about it is the festive season, when people are piling on the calories.
They need to run more.
They need to run more, right? So I think for us, definitely 2022, fitness is a huge factor. I think the second thing probably that, we've realized, because there's a lot of buzzwords that are going around, right? And quite frankly, I'm sick of giving talks on the metaverse and NFTs and that space, because it seems to be the latest lingo, right? But I think, to your point, I think people still need interaction. People still need, like a form that is not just completely 100% virtual. So I think for us, the new challenge or the new experiments that we want to do also in this space, of metaverse, NFT, and of course globally we've sort of registered our metaverse, and all that is underway, right? We've experimented with NFTs, but I think for us, that interesting hybrid of how you engage with consumers who are now very much, whose virtual worlds are probably as rich, if not more rich, than their real worlds in a lot of ways, and yet not lose that human touch, because people are not going to stop stepping out of their house. What they step out for may evolve, but they're not going to stop stepping out of that house. So finding that balance, right, of how you engage with a consumer in both the virtual world, but how do you extend it to the real world as well. I think for a lot of marketers, this is a journey that we are traversing, right? Because it's here to stay. This is how the space is going to evolve. And like, I mean, for the younger generation especially, right? For a lot of them, their virtual worlds are actually
in a way, they're real worlds.
They're real worlds, right? So you can't escape from it. But I think even, the initial engagements that we've done, the initial experiments that we've done, you'll always see that there's a bit of a real world element in it as well, right? So for example, and this is a learning that we've had, and again, to all budding marketers in the room, right? Maybe a bit of info that might help you, right? I think when we've experimented with, say, NFTs in the past, right, we've always realized that a physical giveaway or a physical reward added on to the NFT always makes that, richer. It always makes it more appealing. So while you rush towards this space, and this is the latest buzzword and everyone wants to get into it, be mindful of what value you're adding to the consumer when you get into this space, right? Is the NFT enough, or do you need to sweeten the deal? And is that just something that's exciting because it's new? How do you use it that actually benefits your brand, rather than just getting into it because it's the latest thing and everyone's talking about it, right? So I think traversing this virtual versus real, how do you bring them together? How do you derive most value from both? How do you talk to a consumer that's definitely going to, move towards this concept of a metaverse, move towards Web 3.0, but in a way that is still beneficial for your brand, that still adds value for you and still adds value for your consumer, right? Rather than just going towards it.
Absolutely. I think it's an ever relevant question. Marketers will have to deal with it constantly. There's no certain answers or definite answers to those. Ayaaz, your biggest learnings in 2022? That 2 months are left, so what are those?
I think very interesting question, and I'll answer it in two parts, right? And like Shreya rightly said, that for marketeers, the journey is always evolving, because what we solve for is a consumer tension point. Now, that tension point keeps shifting, and so does marketing as well, and the ways to market to them. But the way I'll answer your question is in two parts. One, I'll talk about the category, what are the three learnings for us, right? Number one for us has been, and that learning has come on to us year on year, because we drive something called the India Protection Quotient. It is a nationwide survey that happens, that goes out and talks to consumers and comes back and tells them about the degree to which they feel underprotected, which means an underinsured India. Now, because of that, what's happened is that our learning is that India is still an extremely underpenetrated market, and we need to go out and talk about protection and life insurance to them. The awareness levels are low. The conversation of sum assured as to how relevant and how much should you be insured is very, very alien, barring the metros. That's number one. Number two is this very, very strong insight on the fact that, and learning for us is, Indians are moving towards retiring poor. We are one of those few nations that aren't planning enough for our retirement days. So I think that number two is an extremely important insight that we're working towards. And again, we have a proprietary survey and intellectual property called India Retirement Index Study, which we publish year on year, that talks about this entire conversation on why Indians are going to retire poor. So I think, again, rich data coming out of that, actionable insights for us, for our products, for our brand to pick up and move forward. Number three, for us as Max Life Insurance, is driving trust with the consumer. I think post the pandemic, even pre-pandemic, the category, the overall trust levels have dipped. A whole lot of researches and consumer data is telling us that the trust that consumers had pre-pandemic on brands has dipped post the pandemic, purely because what really happened was brands at that particular time had to drive a certain purpose, full communication that was different during the pandemic. But unfortunately, brands ended up sending out communication just the way they were doing pre-pandemic. So I think they have ended up alienating a whole lot of their consumers and customers. So I think how to go back and gain their trust and give them the consumer and the customer experience they were always looking for. So these are the three things from a category perspective. Apart from the category, if you go back and say that what are my learnings, I think for me, one thing stands tall amongst all the learnings that I've had is stay consistent with your messaging and what you want to tell to the consumer. Marketeers typically have this habit of getting bored with our own messaging before the consumer does. And a lot of us are at fault because of that. I think stay consistent, make sure that you reach the last mile, and make sure that your entire integrated marketing communication journey is talking of the same messaging, whether it's digital, whether it's on ground, whether it's TV, whether it's print, out of home, etc., anything. The consumer should get one single message. That's number one. Number two is this entire power of video marketing, Vernac, and voice, the 3 V's as I call it. Extremely important. Every 250 kilometers in this country, the language changes. And today, a lot of brands are talking to their consumers in Hindi or maximum English, right? I think we need to understand the fact that you're catering to many Indias within India, and you need to communicate to them in their language. The power of video marketing, I don't think I can say any more about that. I think if I take a raise of hands here as to how many people would prefer watching video on their mobiles or content on OTT versus watching a static creative, I think 90% of us will say that yes, video wins any day. So the power of video marketing, customization and personalization through video marketing, I think is the number 2 learning. And I think number 3 for me within that cohort is moving forward towards voice. I think the time has come for brands and marketers to understand that communicating to the end consumer through voice-enabled communication is very, very important. I think that is the future. That's something we need to get geared up for now. And sooner or later, we'll have to evolve our conversations to voice as well. Last but not the least, I think the importance of driving marketing content and marketing propositions through popular cultural narratives and through passion points of consumers was never more relevant. So if you're trying to solve for a cultural tension point, you need to understand what culture is out there, what is the consumer thinking, and what is the customer telling you. So therefore, listening to your customer and consumer is extremely important, which unfortunately a lot of marketers don't do. There is always a dichotomy there that whether you go with the marketer's gut or you want to go ahead and understand what the customer is saying. But frankly, if it was up to me, your marketer's gut should always go back to the insight and get it ratified from there. Because the time has gone for you to not listen to your customer and consumer.
And Watson, exactly on time. So thank you, Ayaaz, and thank you, Shreya, for this conversation.
Thank you very
Lovely
much.
talking to you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure was all ours.